We're on. Okay. Hi, Brent. Welcome to Venture with Grace. Sorry, I act so dramatic whenever it's on.
It's great to be with you, Grace. And for folks who don't know, we met here in Austin, Texas at an iFly VC conference where you moderated a panel that I was on with a couple of others on AI and how that's impacting the world. It was a lot of fun. We got
Yes.
along well, and you were nice enough to ask me on your podcast. So I'm thrilled to be
Yes.
here.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for taking the time. I was so thrilled when I see you guys on there. And yeah, you are such a legend. And okay, so I prepared some question for you, but I want to start with your beginning at Illinois. So you were from actually Illinois. And why don't we talk about, and then you're actually super self-made. Why don't we talk about like, what were some core lessons from, a boy from Illinois to Harvard Business School to like, accomplishing what you have done to today?
Well, yeah. So both my mom and dad are from this little corn and soybean farming town in southern Illinois. And my dad grew up on a farm. They moved west so my dad could study forestry. Had my brother divorced, moved back to Illinois, small town when I was 3. They remarried each other, moved back west, divorced again. So only lived a small part of my life there in southern Illinois, but that's really where all my roots are, where I'd spend my summers, and I think where a lot of my values come from. The two lessons that I think have been most helpful to me in my career, one's kind of comical and one's kind of academic. The academic one actually came in business school. You can't actually learn something in business school, even if you don't learn a lot. Try to learn at least one thing, and I did. I took a class my second year from Clay Christensen, who's a guy who wrote the book Innovator's Dilemma, coined the term disruptive innovation, disruptive technology. And I took his class in 1997, a year before the book came out, before I knew everything I was learning would become well established and well known. But the class really stuck with me. And the most important thing that I took away from all these stories and case studies of disruptive technology is that they always start disruptive tech at the underserved low end of the market. Think smaller companies who have less money to spend. They just want something cheaper, faster, and easier to use. That's where it starts. It doesn't start the mainstream. It doesn't go after the market leader. It starts at the low end of the market where the market leader is too expensive, too big of a solution. And they build scale there. And it's only after building scale and proving out the technology that then it goes mainstream. It moves up market and it goes to the mainstream of the market. And that technology says, hey, we may only have 80% of the functionality that the market leader has, but we're 90% cheaper, and it's the 80% that you most value. We're actually better than them at that 80%. And so that story of disruptive technology was then instrumental to me in 3 different companies. So, the first was PayPal. And after eBay bought PayPal in 2002, PayPal at the time was only used for transactions on eBay by mom and pop sellers and individual consumers, and for person-to-person transfers. So eBay bought them to create a checkout button on eBay. But I had the big vision as head of PayPal strategy that, okay, yeah, we'll do that, but we can go mainstream. We can go mass market. We'll go off eBay into merchant services, something that wasn't eBay's intent. But the business, the product that had been created by the legendary founders was so spectacularly innovative. It had so many revolutionary things embedded in it that had never been done by banks and financial institutions before. That was pretty clear. We could create products to serve merchants, small, medium, and even the biggest in the world off eBay, and then take it global too. So we did all of that. And it was those lessons really from Clay Christensen and disruptive innovation that said, this is how you actually take this and take over the market, or turn this into something that is truly mainstream and beating all the incumbent providers who are the banks and the payment processors. Ended up doing the same thing with VRBO and HomeAway. Remember, VRBO stood for Vacation Rentals by Owner. Mm-hmm. But then we took that into the mid-market and above, which were property managers who would manage hundreds or even in Europe, tens of thousands of properties. And it became those types of suppliers in addition to vacation rentals by owners to really take vacation rentals global and mainstream. We'll talk later about BigCommerce, same thing. So that was the first really useful thing to me, was disruptive innovation, which I then tried to apply in 3 different industries of e-commerce, travel, and fintech at 3 companies. The other one's comical. I'll be brief here. I had a big break in my career, really only about a dozen years into it. So it was 2005. And, I had been head of strategy at PayPal, head of strategy at eBay. And after being a consultant in the 90s, I was, you'd look at my career and say, oh man, that's pretty pigeonholed. Can he actually operate or do anything? And I got a big break because the head of all of international at PayPal had seen me work, and he's like, we need a new leader for Europe. Brent, why not you? And so I get selected to go to Europe, run PayPal Europe, which at the time was early days, but we still had like 1,000 people in customer service and across Europe. It was a big, booming business. And he sits me down right before I'm about to get on a flight to go over there. He says, Brent, I've got a really important piece of career advice for you. Let me preface this by saying, you are completely unqualified to go do what you're about to do. You've never been a general manager before. You've never managed more than 6 people. You're not even European. You have no idea what you're about to get into. And in order for you to be this successful, there's something fundamentally you've got to change about yourself. And I'm like, well, what's that? He says, serious deadpan German face, your wardrobe. You need to go home tonight, put it in a pile, and light a flame to it. You dress like a Californian. You are moving to Europe, where you will be a regulated and licensed financial institution. You will have to be interacting with financial institutions who process our payments, with regulators. You're going to be meeting with big businesses. People in Europe don't work and dress in khaki pants and shirts that are 3 sizes too large for them. Burn all that stuff and start dressing like an adult. So I'm like, okay, I'd better do this. And, as I'm thinking about like, how do European business people dress? At first you sort of think like suits and jackets and, fashion brands and stuff. But I quickly realized there's a subculture of really great tailoring, of course, Savile Row in London, tailoring in Italy. And I kind of dove head first into all of that. And by the time I was done, I got to know 10 times more about the apparel category. And as a fintech, PayPal, e-commerce person apparel is like one of the 2 biggest categories online in B2C. And I got to know that whole world a lot better. But far more important to my, I think, career in life is I learned to enjoy and be comfortable not dressing to fit in and for other people, but dressing the way I wanted to dress. And it became an expression of my own personality. And I couldn't care less what anybody else thought. I just care about what I thought. Even my wife was driven crazy, by, as a colorblind person, trying to figure out what didn't look stupid together and what did look great together. But the way that's helped me is, one of the best things you can do, I think, in life is get comfortable knowing who you are and becoming a better version of yourself and being comfortable in your own skin. And I really became comfortable in my own skin. And by doing that, you become a lot more comfortable with other people and their differences, their diversity. Here in Austin, we've got this city phrase that is keep Austin weird, where, believe it or not, there's a whole city that kind of embraces the idea that each person's weirdness is part of each person's specialness and what's great about the city. So that was a great piece of advice for me. It got me out of this notion that success is about conformity, and instead success is about being the best version of yourself. And that includes learning what you like and pursuing that.
Wow, I love that. I mean, I always curious why you're always in suits. So you are like the best dressed person.
It's one of my weird, it's called an affectation, but I don't do it for anybody other than myself. I like some people say, I just want to wear the same blue shirt every day. I am the polar opposite. I want to surprise myself each morning based on the weather and my mood and just throw something together that I've never thrown together before. It takes me an extra 15 seconds.
Love that.
Love the 15 seconds. And then I love what's different about each day.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so cool. LinkedIn user said so accurate to your vibe. Great advice, Brent. I don't know who you are, but yeah, I really love this about you and always so demonstrate this in authenticity. Yeah, love that. Okay, so I want to dive a little bit into your career and then also double click on one thing that you just said. So basically, like I like what you said about the like serving the underserved and then start with the low market and then go up, focusing on like the 80% that's good or like that's necessary instead of like the stuff that are more expensive but not necessary. So under your leadership, so you lead BigCommerce expansion from roughly 45 million to about 346 million annual recurring revenue by Q2 2024. Okay. So, and then also you have achieved like a very explosive growth, like 17 consecutive quarters revenue beats. So why don't we start with like what were BigCommerce strategy before you came in? And then what were the things that you've done to help it grow this big?
Yeah, when I came in 2015 and took over for the founders, the company's 45 million in revenue, and it was in a lot worse shape than even I realized coming in. It, for folks who don't know it, is a software as a service e-commerce platform back then for small business. So just like Shopify, it is how a small business would get up and running very quickly with a high-performing, good-looking e-commerce website. The problem for BigCommerce is it was founded in 2009, and although it had quickly grown to be the second largest SaaS platform for small business, Shopify started first. They started in 2004 and really started to gain momentum after maybe around 2010. By the time I came into BigCommerce, Shopify had already IPO'd. They were taking off like a rocket ship. They were already maybe 5 times bigger than BigCommerce. And so that sounds like a kind of dumb company to go into if you've already lost in your original segment. And oh, by the way, you've got 500 other competitors too at all segments of the market. On top of that, like the one startup I had joined in my career back in 2000 was one of the first 5 ever SaaS e-commerce platforms, and that hadn't worked out. So great. I'm joining a company in an industry I've already failed at once in my career, and you've already lost in your core segment. So that sounds like a recipe for non-success. But I came in because I had a very, very, very strong thesis and playbook that we could do classic disruptive innovation, meaning not leave the low end of the market, but expand up into the mid-market. And at the time, the mid-market, the 800-pound gorilla was Magento. Magento is another e-commerce platform that is open source. It was created by the open source Magento community. It's on-premise software. I knew Magento extremely well because PayPal had partnered with them from the earliest days. And in fact, my boss at the time I left in 2010, PayPal was sort of in the process of buying PayPal, which eventually eBay Inc., PayPal did buy Magento. So I knew Magento really well. And for all the respect I had for it, I thought it was crazy that in the year 2015, there wasn't a world-class SaaS platform as an alternative to on-premise software. So the whole thesis was move BigCommerce from a focus on small business, head-to-head competition with Shopify, into the mid-market, head-to-head competition with Magento and all these other legacy on-premise packaged software solutions, and eventually get all the way up into enterprise, because that's just what disruptive technology does, is if it keeps succeeding. So that was fundamentally the thesis. And I guarantee you any other strategy that had kept BigCommerce at the low end of the market, head-to-head with Shopify only, was going to be a doomed strategy. It's not one that would have ever gotten BigCommerce to IPO to hundreds of millions of revenue. And it was one I had to kind of have coming into the company. The board and the management team was looking for somebody. They knew what they were doing, wasn't going to keep working, but they didn't know what to do next. And so I had this pattern recognition of both knowing the industry at that point for 15 years, knowing disruptive innovation, and knowing the core competitor of Magento. And you kind of put that all together. And it's how I was able to say, okay, open SaaS against open source. We're now an open SaaS company. That's not just a strategy. It's also what we have to do with the product. We have to take a closed SaaS platform and open it up with APIs and microservices. We've got to bring the 80% of the flexibility that you get with open source to SaaS. And that requires API access, microservices, et cetera. And that's basically what we did.
I want to, so like, I mean, I wrote down from like listening to your other podcasts, I feel like you mentioned, there is from, I guess, the closed source to open SaaS. And then, so for the folks who doesn't like understand open SaaS, it's like basically using your word, it's like decompose the entire platform into individual components. And I wonder, so like, I guess like, and then the other part is like from mid-market to like enterprise pivot. So that's another big pivot. It's because you guys have when big clients like, you know, Nestle, Sony, like Nvidia, the Real, and stuff like that. So I want to learn more about, like, at the beginning you mentioned because of Shopify was focusing on the small markets, kind of like you know, Clay Christensen, I cannot pronounce his last name. Okay, yeah. Okay, so basically Clay's thing. So like it's like, you know, focusing on the small guys, and then you kind of like be the cheaper competitive version of yourself. And then, but you mentioned that's basically a very saturated market. So you guys kind of like moved up a little bit, right? So I guess like maybe we start with the strategy and then we go for the execution. Let's talk about like what were the things that you're seeing that like make you feel like Magento is like a more easier competitor to compete with versus Shopify?
Well, that's I think almost true in every software category, that if you have on-premise software, well, that means you basically are going to license the software. It's open source. You're actually taking the code and creating now a unique version of it as you modify the code for your individual company. You have to host it, you have to secure it, you have to bug fix it, you have to version it. And all right, maybe that sounds not so hard if you're an engineer, but the folks buying this are retail companies. They're brand manufacturers. They're B2B companies, industrial companies. They're not technology companies. And the idea that in order to sell your product online, you have to figure out the source code of it and how to modify it, how to secure it, how to bug fix it, how to host it, how to version it. Nightmare. Especially if you look at like what would happen with Magento, and every 6 months there's some new security vulnerability and you have to drop everything that you're doing until you figure out how to patch that, and or you kind of ignore those and you just go along with security vulnerabilities until you get hacked and everything goes south. That's not a great version. Now, not every version of on-premise software is open source. A lot of it's packaged. And if you think about the high end of the market, the enterprise end of the market, packaged software would be like IBM WebSphere and Oracle and SAP, Hybris. These are super expensive, very legacy platforms. And they cost companies millions of dollars to implement, millions of dollars to run every year. Non-technology companies had to become technology companies just to keep whatever they were running up. And so it was a disaster. The world needed SaaS. There was one SaaS platform at the high end of the market called Demandware, and they were the first e-com platform. Well, actually the second. I think Oracle ATG was the first, but they were the first SaaS platform to IPO, and then they got bought by Salesforce. So there was just one SaaS platform in the mid and high end of the market that was very good, but even they were a very old version of SaaS, sort of like with root code running from Intershop, a German platform from the 90s. And I knew that they were all vulnerable. They were charging a lot more than we were. We had many aspects of our platform that were more modern. Now, we're younger than all these platforms, so we wouldn't have every bell and whistle. We wouldn't have every element of functionality. But in classic Clay Christensen, if we can come to you and we're 80% cheaper, higher performing, far more innovative, more open and modular, then all right, we may not be the best platform for every company, but as long as the compromises you make aren't truly detrimental to your business, the advantages can significantly outweigh that. And that was really the whole thesis around BigCommerce. And again, open SaaS going against not just open source, which was Magento, but on-premise or packaged software.
Totally. I'm taking notes. By the way, quick shout out to the listeners. Hi, Daniel. Everyone's saying amazing things about you. Hi, LinkedIn user. Hi, Matthew. And then hi, another LinkedIn user. Okay. Love this. So
let me say some gratitude. Like, I think, I don't know when word of this went out, but have people who know me or have worked with me before participating in this. I'm very humbled and grateful for that. Thank you.
Love, you're very popular. Okay, so another question I had was like, okay, so since you guys like move up market, like how do you know? I guess I think this whole entire strategy about like starting smaller company to bigger company is very new, because I feel like in Silicon Valley, a lot of the SaaS investors encourage people to logo shop. So like after you say you have like 3 big logo, and then you can go up or down market, and then everyone's like trying to get the, you know, big clients from like the big companies, right? But I wonder, so like when you are thinking about if a company is selling to a bunch of a smaller market, what's the benefit to that? I feel like it's more decentralized because of like, you know, your revenue source is not coming from one company, but typically the smaller company also don't have a huge budget to spend, and then maybe the company would also die, and then after you know, spend some time to like actually get a client, and kind of like, what if the startup ramp up, right? So like, how do you think about which target group to go after first? And then when you guys move up market, since I feel like the Sony or Nvidia or the real, like it's not easy to sell to. Like I feel like the you know, the sales period is a lot longer than, you know, the smaller things. And I wonder, how do you basically, I guess, like how do you kind of, first of all, selling to smaller companies, and then second of all, it's like, how do you think about selling to mid-market or like winning large customers?
Well, in our case, you go back to 2016, 2017, when we first really start talking about enterprise and trying to sell up. And, you know, it's enterprise in name, but we don't, you know, at the time, maybe we've got 60% enterprise functionality, not 80%, because it's a strategy. We haven't executed the whole thing yet. We also don't have anything close to what you would now call an enterprise go-to-market. Like no such thing as account-based marketing in 2016 at BigCommerce. We had salespeople who knew how to sell up market, but we did not have the capability to go create our own demand. We were reliant on the smart technologists within companies realizing, especially these big companies, the burden of having to secure and version and manage would kill their e-commerce initiatives. They're like, it's too expensive. And they were wanting to launch things. And so what we were trying to find were those folks who really believed in the new model of SaaS, not the old model of packaged software, and who had enough of a business case to say, we can't afford to spend millions of dollars implementing this and maintaining this. That's not within the budget. E-commerce gets killed. I want to get e-commerce done. And it would typically be people who themselves were forward thinkers in the organizations. And then they would find us. The hard part then would be selling in, especially because people would point to you and say, hey, BigCommerce, you're known for small business. You know, your logo, your existing logos look like small business. How do you convince me that you can really serve our needs? We had a breakthrough customer back in 2016, and I wish I could say their name. They just categorically don't let other companies reference them, no matter how hard I tried and asked. But it's one of the world's, let's call it, 3 biggest consumer packaged goods companies. And they started adopting BigCommerce for all of their household brands. Like every person on this call has lots of their brands in their house. And if they had ever gone to the branded websites, you could pick up the same things in the grocery store and discount store and Amazon. You would have been on a BigCommerce hosted site. And although we didn't get the brand benefit at BigCommerce because they wouldn't let us talk about the corporate brand publicly, it was very important to venture investors to see, wow, if you could do that with them, what about these other companies? There was also a moment at about the same point in time when one of the world's 3 largest industrial companies also picked us for all of their e-commerce. And this would have been all B2B. And so we've just won one of the 3 biggest CPG companies in the world for consumers. And we've just won one of the 3 biggest B2B companies, industrial companies. Unfortunately for us, that industrial company then broke up into 3 pieces and all the e-commerce initiatives were killed in the process. And so we never got the benefits of that turbocharge on B2B. Although I'm proud to say today that what BigCommerce is doing in B2B really is market leading. It's exceptional what they're doing. And although, you can say that Shopify is like the 8,000 pound gorilla in B2C, they're not in B2B. And I think BigCommerce runs circles around them in B2B and many other companies. And that's one of the reasons why I still think BigCommerce has very exciting days ahead of it, is in particular what it's doing in B2B. But if only it had gotten that tailwind back in 2016 by virtue of winning that company, because the initial use cases that they were going to implement would have been some of the coolest B2B sites on the web.
Wow. Okay. So I wonder, I guess, like, I feel like this is such an interesting thing to study. And then I wonder, as a CEO, how do you understand the technology component of the business back then? Besides, like, obviously, I'm sure you have a great CTO and stuff like that. But like, I guess, like, from, because I feel like this is both of a business decision as well as, like, because you were unbundling, basically you created the open SaaS platform, right? So how do you understand the technology component to it? And then to what extent that kind of impact the business decision?
Yeah, full confession, I'm not a software engineer and I'm not a technologist. I've been a global head of product management before. That was at PayPal. I think as a product person, and then I have to rely on the technologists to, in essence, architect and deliver the technology. And the real product problem, as I mentioned, in going up against open source, is the biggest advantage of open source is we get access to all the code, we can change any of it, and we can modify it to do whatever we need. SaaS, on the other hand, is only as open as the APIs allowed, and you're still never getting access to the source code. So how do you give the benefits, as many of the benefits of mid-market and enterprise level flexibility, openness, as possible within a SaaS model? And so that business problem is, again, the solution to that business problem is what we called open SaaS. We're going to open up SaaS. And at the time they called them, microservices. It's really just APIs and taking every element of the product. And I remember in our IPO roadshow, I had a diagram that I'd been using for years that showed all the areas of product functionality. And there are maybe 20 of them laid out, although technically there's sub-functionality under each one. It's things like catalog, payments, orders, shipping, storefront areas. It's all these different areas in an e-com platform, and which ones we had opened up via the APIs and which ones we were still working on. And that was really the litmus test for us, because everything that had not yet been opened up via the APIs was a competitive disadvantage for us. It was a limiter and a reason why we would be unable to serve some mid-market and enterprise use cases because that area of the functionality had not been opened up yet.
Mm-hmm.
But we took that to an extreme. And so think about us versus Shopify.
Mm-hmm.
Where Shopify would always lead with is how do we make a one size fits most or many as great as possible in terms of functionality, user experience. And yeah, we would try to do that too. But the first question we would always ask is how do we first open this up for enterprise use cases? And then the functionality we're going to build on top of that in case the functionality that we build isn't exactly what every customer needs. They've got the underlying APIs and then they can modify from there.
I wonder, since like we briefly touch upon the delivering like 17 straight quarters of like beating revenue expectations. First of all, like how do you set revenue expectations like for like as a big company CEO? Like how do you think about setting up the revenue target that's kind of like reaching forward, but also like, you know, it's kind of reachable. So like people don't lose hope if we don't like hit the quarter. And then like another question is like, how do you prioritizing like rebuild the platform versus like sales? Because, you know, as you mentioned at the beginning, the platform was like only 60% ready to sell to enterprise. You have to, I guess, rebuild or open it up and everything else. So I guess like change the foundation infrastructure from it. But on the other hand, like you have to also sell at the same time as a business. How do you focus on like what do you focus on first? Like is that rebuild the infrastructure first, or do you sell at the same time? How do you think about like growth and also rebuild the tools and shovels basically?
Sorry, I'm looking at my son who just came in the room. Aaron, did you have any more operation on your ear? No? All right. Is it healing okay? Yeah. All right. My son does jujitsu and his ear is healing.
Yeah, I hope he's okay.
Yeah. So as a general, BigCommerce has been public for 4 years, but you get a somewhat similar dynamic as a private company. The company before that I IPO'd, HomeAway with the RBO, that was public for 4 years. And of course, eBay, PayPal was public. It's an art and a science. There is a science to doing the best job you can as a CFO and a leadership team, basically forecasting and projecting the business based on everything you know about it. Current trends, current pipeline, current investments. And then there's an art to doing the trade-offs between like, okay, if we expect this, but we need to hedge against our best intentions and best aspirations, what do you actually guide to at a lower number? Which, all right, when you're private, it's not the end of the world if you miss your numbers. When you're public, it's really, really bad. Okay, so you at least want to meet those numbers. But the lower you guide, all right, you may say, well, why don't you just guide lower? Well, that then sets expectations and disappoints Wall Street, right? And there was an initial era after BigCommerce went public in 2020 where it seemed like we were beating our guidance every quarter by 5 to 8% on the top line. Although, in all fairness, we had these incredible COVID tailwinds, and we were being surprised, like how long is our lockdown's going to last? You just don't know. And then all of a sudden, everything reversed in 2022, right? Inflation goes up, interest rates go up, e-commerce shutters to it's like the brakes just slammed shut. And an industry that had been growing 30+% during the lockdowns was now down in low to mid single digits, even had a negative quarter in there, which we could not have anticipated, but we somehow managed to still hit our numbers, unlike most companies that missed in 2022. But that's kind of brutal. So it's this art in this game. The higher you guide, the more risk there is in missing your guidance. But then the better the expectations that are set with Wall Street, assuming you can hit it. So you get some of those market cap benefits early. And you can also just plan to spend more if you're confident you can deliver the top line. But it's really hard. And my sympathy goes out especially to the public company, CFOs, CEOs, business unit managers, sales leaders. You've got a gun to your head every quarter, which is these are the numbers, the external numbers, the internal numbers that you're trying to hit. And it's a tough business. And if you're public, there's just no mercy for it, right? It's especially tough when the rules of the game change. And, we saw those change. The rules were crazy in 2022. This is back when we IPO'd, I was flabbergasted that we could get away with pricing our stock at basically 10 times revenue. I mean, we're a company that at the time, maybe 150, 60 million in revenue. We're growing in the 30+% range. We're still quite unprofitable, as were nearly all venture funded and even public companies back in 2020. And I'm like, how on earth is that worth 10x revenue? Well, we closed trading. So we opened at 10x and we closed at 30 times revenue on that first day. It was a $5 billion market cap and a 3 times return on that first day of trading. That made no sense whatsoever. How on earth could a company with the fundamentals we had be trading at 30 times revenue? But that's what the market was doing to us and so many other companies. And then, of course, all those rules changed by 2022, when the reality that we won't have zero interest rates forever. There is a cost to investing capital. Consumer and business markets, everybody starts tightening their belt. Companies have to become more profitable. All the rules suddenly changed. And how you navigate through all of that when your own plan was to, keep growing as fast as you can. That's what the market rewarded to. No, they want profitability in the near term. And you've got to go through, sort of restructurings and cost cutting and rationalization that, frankly, a sane business world would have expected all along, but that's not the way it had been operating. And those are just tough things to manage and lead through. I think anybody who has, most people on this call have been through companies over the last 5 years who've gone through similar dynamics. And it doesn't matter where you are in the company. Those are challenging dynamics to lead through. And the best you can do is just realize the world changes, rules change. What you want to do at all points in time is use your best judgment, your best integrity, be flexible, be humane, and try to do the best job you can. But it's tough, especially in the public markets, because you don't have everything you do is going to be transparent, on at least once a quarter.
Totally. Okay. So I want to switch gear a little bit, because I think we talked a lot about how to grow a company that you have grew before. Why don't we talk about, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this, but I think we chat about other companies, for example, like Strava or other companies in the wellness or healthcare space that which you care a lot about. Let's say if you are today, let's say you're running one of these companies like a Strava, what would you do to help them grow revenue?
Yeah. So I think I run into some people who sort of run companies by the mantra that culture is the most important thing. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. You run into a lot of PE-owned companies where operational excellence and discipline is sort of the rule of the game. And then there's strategy, which is what is the mission purpose of the company, and how is it you will go about delivering to the world a product or service in a way that's different and better than anybody else is doing that, and therefore earn growth. I guess it's kind of trite to say that obviously all three are very important. And any company that has one or more of those that are missing, like you're bad at execution or operation, well, you better be in industry. You're going to be in trouble. A bad culture, of course, is going to lead to all sorts of problems. The thing I personally lead with, and I don't think there's a one size fits all, it's just like, what am I best at? It's the strategy. Like every time I walk into a company, I need to, within 2 months, have defined a 5-year vision for the company, a strategy based on 3 to 5 things that we're going to do differently and better than anybody else in the world, and get everybody aligned around that plan. And then I believe it's a lot easier to have a really healthy culture when there's a mission and a strategy that people understand and are bought into, and that's not changing with the wind every few months or ambiguous. Operational excellence is then also especially critical in a world where you've got to be profitable. And the more competitive an industry, the more your own inefficiencies are going to be exposed. Now, I was pretty lucky in some of the early companies I was at because they were two-sided network effects businesses. eBay's a marketplace, right? Buyers go where sellers go where buyers are. To this day, the world has, in the US, one really big marketplace, and that's eBay. PayPal, two-sided, consumers and businesses. It's still to this day the biggest, financial services app and checkout button. And then VRBO, HomeAway, two-sided marketplace in vacation rentals. And the reality of each of those businesses, if your strategy is really good and your culture is pretty good, you can get away with a fair amount of operational non-excellence because industries aren't that competitive. And you can be very profitable because you've got a network effects business. It couldn't be less true in a highly competitive SaaS or software company where we had 500 plus competitors in e-commerce, and we had to get a lot better over time at everything that we did, whether it's customer service, it's marketing, it's sales, it's business operations and IT, it's how you release software. We had to get a lot better at all of those things over time. And some of that is at the corporate level, but a lot of it comes down to the functional leaders in each of those areas, because you're not going to have at the high end of the company a CEO or a CFO or whatever who is an expert in operational excellence in each subdiscipline. You really have to hire great people in those, but still have a culture of, hey, we've got to be efficient. Here are the types of leverage metrics and operating metrics that we're aspiring to. Continuous improvement. You've got to drive a culture at the top of operational excellence, but it's going to come down to experts in each area delivering on that.
Okay, so I was taking notes. One thing you said was strategy matter first. Like when you walk into a company.
Me, but there are other people. Look, if you're the world's best culture leader, and I've worked with people who are really good. Shout out to RA. Some people are going to lead with that element, lead with their strengths. Like I go back to one of the things I said earlier, which is we're each different. And if you can understand the way you get the best impact in your career is by understanding what your greatest strengths and passions are and really lighting those fires, right? And trying to bring your best talent and passion to an organization. You can't be mediocre at everything or good at everything. Big impact in your career. You've got to be great at a couple of things and try to align the jobs you're in with those things that you're truly great at. And then the thing you're not great at, you've got to be self-aware and not make the organization vulnerable to your own lack of experience, lack of talent, lack of whatever in certain areas. And I think all people, myself included, can look back at points in their career where they say, okay, I'm fully self-aware, or I didn't fully compensate for my weaknesses at that point. And those are the things you can you can learn from. The answer isn't to try to get great at everything. Not possible. It's try to become spectacularly good at a number of things, and then also be self-aware and not insecure about bringing in terrific people to solve those problems that they know how to solve.
Let's say I want to piggyback on whatever you just said. Also, quickly shout out to everybody who because we have like a ton of common vlog in. I think he mentioned his name. I think it was Jason. Maybe it's the LinkedIn user, and then Nick. Hello, Nick. And then there's a bunch of other LinkedIn user. I don't know if it's the same person or different people. Just want to say hi to all of you. Obviously, you're a superstar, Brent. You're like keep bringing.
I'm so grateful for my old friends who have found this and tuned in live. God bless y'all. Appreciate it.
Okay. So one thing you kind of mentioned is like identify your own core strength, right? There's two part of it. Like one is, first of all, like what do you think is your personal strengths? I'm sure at this point it's kind of strategy, but when it comes down to strategy, I guess like what do you identify as your own strength? And then the second of all is like, how do you think about the competitors that are betting on something completely different? So for example, let's say your strength is revenue and then the other person's strength is, let's call it marketing. But let's say if you are selling like a particular product or something in a very competitive industry, I think like the biggest fear isn't necessarily like if someone betting to like a similar strategy as you but out execute you. But I think the biggest thing is like, what if someone betting on something, I'm sorry, can you hear me? I think it's froze, or am I crazy? Hi guys. Okay, can anyone see us, or is this just me right now? Is this me, everyone? Can you guys see me, or is this like, is my side of the problem here, or like technical difficulty? What is going on? Oh, you're back. Hi.
I have absolutely no idea why my Chrome browser just closed.
So, yeah. Welcome to Streamyard. Hi, yeah. Streamyard God, please do not block us. Okay, not crazy, just you. Oh, okay. Sorry. I was like, is this just me or am I crazy? Okay, great. Okay, so I guess my question was like, okay, so when you were thinking about the competitive landscape, right? So like let's say if someone's executing on your strategy, I don't think that should be your fear because you probably will out execute someone because you pick that strategy. But on the other hand, there might be people picking another strategy that's like maybe your second ideal strategy, but they kind of go really hard on that end. So it's kind of like a Shopify and BigCommerce. Like let's say Shopify is going hard at the small audience or like BigCommerce going mid-market. So I think that's the strategy that you kind of fear of because of you're like, oh, I could have done that. I could have done small market, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But on the other hand, I guess like how do you kind of calm yourself down to be like, okay, let's focus on what we're good at instead of like not copying the competitor because of like they seems like it's working for them too.
Well, in all humbleness, the hardest part we faced was that we had a big competitor who was, many times our size who did both, right? Shopify is a great company. And for a couple of years, we really got lucky and got away with it because they were pretty actively dismissive of enterprise and mid-market for a stretch of time. Their roots are serving the entrepreneur. They were philosophically committed to that. And they weren't really interested and rather dismissive of enterprise. In fact, they branded themselves the anti-enterprise platform at one point. They were dismissive of B2B, said that's not us. They were dismissive of headless and composable commerce, saying we're not interested in that. And that was advantageous for us because it gave us years to get ahead of them as we invested in those areas. The challenge is they were so good at what they were doing that they became enormously big and had, probably a IT and development budget that was 10 times or more BigCommerce's. And it then when they sort of woke up and realized, hey, there's a lot of stuff BigCommerce is doing that's really smart, and we could compete in those areas too. We could have our cake and eat it as well. They started doing both. They kept doing innovation in really terrific ways, but then they were copying or fast following what they could. Now, in all fairness to BigCommerce, to this day, there are a bunch of things that they haven't been able to copy and that are really big competitive advantages for BigCommerce. One is true multi-storefront capabilities, which is a fundamental, essential component of enterprise commerce. And BigCommerce did the 4 or 5 year rewrite the code base to become multi-storefront enabled. That's still a big competitive advantage. Everything the team's doing in B2B is spectacular. I mean, shout out to the B2B team at BigCommerce. They are true superstars of the e-commerce world. And there are probably 20 times as many companies who should be using BigCommerce for B2B as are today. Composable things that BigCommerce has done are a lot better. But, Shopify can always throw a lot of resources at trying to close the gaps that aren't too architecturally hard or complex to close. If it's just feature functionality stuff, arguably most of that they can get to as fast as they just choose to. And so that makes them a very tough competitor. Sometimes you can be in this trap where, you're not safe doing one thing, even if your competitor does something different, because they're a lot bigger and they'll do both.
Wow. Okay, so when they do both, like I guess there's two part of it. One part is like, what's your mindset as a CEO? Let's say like your competitor copy your main feature immediately, and then you're like, oh, like shit, we need to move to a different direction immediately. Or like, oh, we should stick around because they throw more money, they couldn't compete with us. How do you kind of like maintain the moat and then also like calm yourself down like mentally? Because I think a lot of it's mental to like, oh, should we also throw more time and resources into XYZ to compete with them head to head? Or how do you kind of like think about those kind of stuff? Hi, Brent. I don't know which one is you. Also, hi, LinkedIn user. Okay, we'll cover this one too. Oh my God. Oh, what is going on? I'm sorry. We encounter so many technical difficulties today. Hi, Tom. Want to quickly shout out to all the audience, and then hi, LinkedIn user. We can talk about more B2B service as multi storefront, and then hi, Marvin. Hi, James. Okay, and then hi, LinkedIn user. I think we have some sort of like issue with the internet today, so that's why it's kind of like crazy looking for a minute. Oh, back. You're back. Okay, amazing.
It keeps like crashing my Chrome browser.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, everybody is like popping up. Hi, Tony. Okay, so amazing. Okay, so I was reading all the comments like, hi, Tony, hi, Tom, hi, James, hi, Marvin. Like it was a lot of people. Okay, so one of the audience asked, wait, hold on. Oh, Jason. Hi, Jason. Sorry, I finally see your name. Okay, this one. Can you talk more about B2B service as well as multi-storefront?
Oh, I'll probably bore people. But to be really quickly, multi-storefront is when you've got one company and multiple brands, divisions, or geographies. So like, let's say you want one storefront that is selling to the US and Canada, and another one selling to Mexico, and another one selling to the UK, different currencies, sometimes different languages. Another example is you're that consumer packaged goods conglomerate, right? And let's say you've got multiple brands that want their own branded websites, or even one brand that has sub-brands that they're selling to. So being able to support that's multi-storefront. And B2B is for sellers that are selling to other businesses. Think of an industrial manufacturer or a software company who's selling software to other businesses, or a distributor who's distributing to retailers or other suppliers. That's B2B, and it's very different than B2C. By the way, B2B commerce is now, in terms of just online sales volume, bigger than B2C is globally, even though it's sort of later to adopt. And so there's still lots of growth happening in B2B e-commerce.
I want to talk about AI at the end because since I think on our panel we're speaking about AI, so I think you're really bullish on healthcare versus consumer or fintech basically. So maybe if you could share a little bit more on where do you think AI will have the biggest impact and then why healthcare?
Yeah,
Also,
so the way I framed it in our panel discussion, and I'm glad because I've heard other people who really are AI pioneers say something similar to what I did, is I went back to Clay Christensen and I said, the question is industry by industry. Will AI be a sustaining technology or a disruptive technology? What do I mean by that is, as AI is adopted in e-commerce, will that change who the winners are in e-commerce? Or instead, will AI be used most effectively by the market leaders to make their businesses even better? So put simply, will AI most impactfully be used by companies like Shopify and BigCommerce and Salesforce and Adobe? Or instead, will there be a new platform that comes out that knocks them all out because it's AI first? I think that in e-commerce, for the more than not, AI is going to be sustaining, right? That the market leaders today are going to use it to their competitive advantage, and they will not be knocked out in a lot of the very subcategories of e-commerce. I think the same thing is true in financial services. That's an easier bet because in financial services, you can't afford hallucinations. You can't afford any of the errors that can be introduced by AI. And I'm kind of hard pressed to find it. I'm sure there are some, but I'm hard pressed to find major areas of financial services where AI means the current leaders like Stripe or PayPal or whomever are going to get knocked out of their leadership positions. Travel, I think the same thing mostly, although I'm sure there'll be some cool AI small apps and services. However, now let me get to the opposite side, because you can come up with all sorts of industries where that's not true, where you think AI is going to completely change how consumers and businesses consume services in those industries. And one of my favorites, again, is health and healthcare. The ability of any one doctor, whether a general practitioner or a specialist in a field, to have in their heads the total corpus and body of modern science of medicine and give a consumer the best possible advice on how to treat their sickness or enhance their health, no way. There's no one doctor who can do that. That's trivially easy for AI. AI actually can consume the entire world's body of published research in medicine and can be trained by doctors, including specialists in different fields, to basically synthesize that knowledge. And as an example, a company like Function Health, which is a $500 a year, get a comprehensive blood panel, 100 different biomarkers, and then it's telling you based on the science and the research around each of those biomarkers, not just where are you in the range, but then what would the science say you should learn from where you are in that range and potentially what you should do about it. You're not going to find any one doctor who can do that across that entire group. Now, it's not like there's a single truthful answer to every single biomarker and every single, protocol and what you do, or whether you do something on things. And so it's not like AI is perfect, but the benefits of what AI and the world's science can bring together into a simple app that demystifies. The consumer doesn't need to become an expert, doesn't need to have an army of doctors. This is all being now simplified for the consumer. I think it's going to completely change how we understand our own health. It's going to demystify it for consumers. It's going to lead to a far better product for consumers than anything that exists on the market today. And so human health, I think, is one of the most exciting areas where AI is going to completely transform everything. And let's just be honest, it's very broken today. It's like 16% healthcare alone, not even the health side of health, but healthcare, sick care is like 16% of the US economy. The costs are skyrocketing. The results are not getting better in terms of American lifespans and health. So what we have in terms of an incumbent, it's ready to be disrupted. Cost needs to come way down. Outcomes need to get a lot better. And I think AI is an enabler for that.
Totally. I really like what people also like how you frame it. So basically there are things that could be fundamentally reshaped by AI. So there's like new winners in a category versus if there is like just incremental change. So the current winners are just gonna still stay ahead. I think that's like such a great definition, and healthcare sounds like will be the category that, leveraging AI, there are people could be potentially creating new winners to like go against the incumbent. Okay, so we're about to hit our time. So I want to end with like a quick fire round for you. Okay, what's your favorite book?
Favorite book all time, probably the Lord of the Rings series.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Boy, I think if I could say one person, it would be the third manager that I had at McKinsey, who was a really good mentor of mine for a number of years and just sort of a role model at life when you're young in your life and you're trying to figure out how to become an adult and how to become yourself. You look at different people and examples, and he was somebody that I looked at as like, I like a lot of what he's done. How do I figure out versions of that for myself?
Mm-hmm.
I won't name him because I just don't want to name and shame, but
I'm sorry. So
talking about. Yeah.
Okay, love that. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to my dinner party? Boy. Arthur Brooks and Jonathan Haidt. Arthur Brooks is sort of the happiness writer for The Atlantic and now a Harvard Business School professor. Jonathan Haidt wrote one of my favorite books of all time, a bunch of books that I recommend, but one of my favorites is The Righteous Mind, where he basically tries to establish that the science says more than 50% of people's political and ideological leanings are hardwired at birth by their personality type. And people are spending their life rationalizing their personality type in ways that can be moralistic and just disrespectful to other people who have real values. They just happen to differ subtly on various dimensions. And so I almost think The Righteous Mind should be required reading for everybody to understand not just the flaw in all of the tribal divisions in our society, but how to recognize in themselves their own mistakes if they fall into that, and have a lot more grace for other people who have different beliefs.
Wow. Since we chat so much on strategy, is there any strategy book that you would recommend?
No, I don't really read a lot of strategy books. When I'm running a company, I try to focus on customers and employees and partners and stuff like that. I'm not out reading a lot of academic.
Love that.
literature.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work? Did you say?
On
my bicycle a lot. That's pretty much, cycling and a bit of running and a bit of weightlifting, but really cycling is my passion. And most mornings, nearly every day of the week, before I start working on something, I'm getting that workout in. That's number one. And a few nights a week, I like to drink good wine with friends and family. So that's another place you'll find me.
Love. I thought we could also find you in any fashion show as like the suit is
No,
like always
look,
on point.
I'm not a good looking man. So I think my clothes are good looking because they were made by really, really skilled tailors. But unfortunately, the scaffolding that they hang on is unworthy of a fashion show.
Oh my God. I feel like you're so put together all the time. But anyway, okay. Also, I want to say a big thank you to all the LinkedIn like users. Maybe it's the same person, maybe it's a different people. And also a bunch of you came on and then said hi. I really appreciate it. Brent, you're such a popular guest. Love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Grace, it was delightful to see you again and be invited. And I'm especially grateful to the folks that already knew me and tuned in, and hope to see you guys, each one of you in person, sooner rather than later. Thanks all.
Amazing. Thank you. Let me quickly end stream.